The call came on a Tuesday. Not a dramatic Tuesday. Not a Tuesday where I'd had any reason to brace myself. I was at my desk in Chicago eating a turkey sandwich from the deli downstairs, reviewing a client's quarterly filings, when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. A 937 area code. Dayton. I almost let it go to voicemail. I wish I had. The man on the other end introduced himself as Thomas Greer, assistant manager at Callaway Hardware off Wilmington Pike. His voice was pleasant, neutral, the voice of someone who had no idea he was about to say something that would sit with me for months. I just wanted to confirm the return was processed correctly, he said. Your father came in Saturday. The Craftsman 230-piece toolkit, the engraved one. He said he'd like store credit instead of a refund to the original card. I set my sandwich down. I'm sorry, I said. Can you say that again? He repeated it. Same words. Same pleasant tone. I thanked him, hung up, and sat very still for a moment. I'd bought that toolkit 6 weeks earlier. Spent 3 lunch breaks researching it. Paid $367 for the set and another $45 for engraving at a shop in Wicker Park that could do it on the main case. I had them put, for the man who built things right. It took me 4 tries to settle on those words. I wanted something that sounded like I knew him, not like I'd Googled birthday messages for dads. He'd opened it at his birthday dinner on a Saturday night, held it up, said, "Oh, wow," and set it aside. I thought the "oh wow" was good. I thought setting it aside meant he was saving it, that he'd use it in the shop, that he'd show the guys on Monday. He returned it 4 days later. For store credit. And he hadn't said a word to me. I checked my credit card account. The refund hadn't gone back to my card. He'd chosen store credit, which meant the $412 I'd spent was now sitting in Callaway Hardware as a credit in my father's name. My money. His account. No conversation. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this. My father is not a cruel man by any obvious measure. He doesn't yell. He doesn't drink. He coaches Little League on Thursday evenings and the kids adore him. He has a handshake that makes strangers trust him immediately. He is charming and capable and, in every public setting I've ever watched him in, he seems like exactly the kind of father a daughter would be lucky to have. That's the part that makes this hard to explain. Because for the last 4 years, while my father was being charming and capable and trusted by strangers, I had been quietly holding his business together from 800 miles away. And he had never once thought to mention it. My name is Callie Marsh. I'm 29. I'm a CPA licensed in Illinois, and I work for a mid-size accounting firm in the Loop. I specialize in small business tax strategy, which means I spend most of my time helping business owners pay less to the IRS, legally, ethically, without the kind of panic that comes from doing nothing until April 14th. My father, Callie Marsh, owns Marsh Home Services in Dayton, Ohio. Residential contracting, roofing, gutters, windows, general repairs. He started it when I was 12 with 2 employees and a white pickup truck. By the time I graduated college, it had grown to 11 employees, a small fleet of trucks, and a real office on Salem Avenue with his name on the door. My brother Derek, who is 3 years younger than me, works in the business. Operations manager is the title on his card, though from what I've seen, the title mostly means he drives the nicer truck and handles customer calls that don't require paperwork. Derek is my father's person. That's the only way I know how to say it. Derek is the one my father calls when something good happens. Derek is the one who sits next to him at Thanksgiving, who gets taken along to trade shows, who gets referenced in my father's stories. My father has a way of talking about Derek that sounds like he's describing a colleague he genuinely admires. He'll say, "Derek really has a head for this business, and you can hear the pride in it." Real pride, not performance. He never sounds like that when he talks about me. He sounds careful. Like someone choosing words. Callie's doing well out in Chicago. Or, she's very focused on her career. It's not unkind. It's just distant, the way you'd describe a neighbor you get along with but don't really know. I moved to Chicago at 22 for graduate school and stayed because I got a job offer I couldn't turn down. My father came to graduation. He shook hands with my professors, told them he was proud, took photos. On the drive to the airport afterward, he said, "You know, Derek's thinking about taking some business classes at the community college." That was the whole ride to the airport. Derek's business classes. I don't think he knew he did it. That's the thing about how my father treats me versus Derek. It's not calculated cruelty. It's thoughtlessness that has calcified into pattern. He doesn't choose Derek over me the way you'd choose something deliberately. He just reaches for Derek the way you reach for a habit, automatically, without thinking. 4 years ago, the summer I turned 25, my father called me in a genuine panic. It was July, past the extension deadline, and he'd just received a notice from the IRS about discrepancies in 3 years of business filings. His previous accountant had retired. The replacement had made serious errors. He was looking at potential penalties of over $21,000 and he didn't fully understand why. I spent 2 weekends in Dayton that August going through 5 years of records. I found the errors, filed amended returns, negotiated with the IRS on the penalty structure, and reduced his exposure from $21,000 to just under $2,400. My father cried when I told him the number. Actually cried. Hugged me in the kitchen and said, "I don't know what I would have done without you." I thought, this is the start of something different. I should tell you I have a habit of thinking that. After the IRS situation resolved, I offered to take over his quarterly filings. Keep things clean, catch issues before they became penalties. No charge. He was my father. He said yes immediately and that was that. For the next 4 years, every quarter, I pulled his books, reviewed expenses, reconciled accounts, filed payroll taxes, prepared his estimated payments, and monitored his business license renewals. I flagged a vendor who had been overbilling him on disposal fees. That alone saved him about $3,200 over 2 years. I caught a payroll error that would have triggered a late penalty. I helped him structure a small equipment loan in a way that maximized his deductions for the year. I did this from Chicago. On evenings and weekends. Around a full-time job that was itself demanding. I told myself it was fine. That it was what family did. And I believed it, mostly, until I started noticing the pattern. Whenever I solved something for my father's business, he thanked me the way you thank someone for passing the salt. Brief, functional, moving on. Whenever Derek did anything for the business, my father talked about it for weeks. Derek had renegotiated the contract with their roofing supplier. Derek had found a new dispatch software. Derek had handled a difficult client complaint beautifully. In 2023, Derek took out a business loan in his own name to purchase equipment for the company. My father co-signed it. He called me afterward, not to ask my opinion, just to tell me. "Derek's really stepping up," he said. "Taking ownership. I'm proud of him." I said, "That's great, Dad." He said, "You know, you and Derek are both doing well in your own ways." Your own ways. There it was again. As if the work I did for his business was somehow in a separate category from Derek's work, even though mine was the reason his books hadn't triggered another IRS notice. I didn't say any of that. I filed the next quarterly return and went back to my life. His birthday is October 18th. He turned 57 this year. I know what you're thinking. After 4 years of invisible work and constant comparison, why was I still putting this much thought into a birthday gift? Honestly? Because every year there was a part of me that believed this year would be different. That the right gesture at the right moment would do something I hadn't been able to accomplish with 4 years of careful, consistent labor. I kept looking for the thing that would finally make him see me. I know how that sounds. But if you've ever been the overlooked child, you already understand the particular stubbornness of that hope. It doesn't respond to logic. It just keeps going, quieter some years, louder others, but always there. I spent 3 lunch breaks reading reviews of professional tool sets. My father uses tools every day. Real ones, not decorative. He still goes out on job sites regularly, still likes to show his crew that he knows how to use his hands. He'd mentioned the Craftsman 230-piece set twice over the years, once when one of his employees got one, once when he saw it in a catalog. I remembered both times. I ordered it in September to make sure it would arrive on time. Paid $367 for the set and then $45 for engraving at a shop in Wicker Park. The engraving said, "For the man who built things right." It took me 4 tries to settle on those words. I shipped it ground to Dayton so it would arrive 2 days before his birthday. Paid $28 for the shipping. $440 total. More than I'd spent on any gift for anyone, including myself, that year. He texted me when the box arrived. A thumbs up emoji and, "Got it." That was it. But I told myself he'd open it at the dinner. He always saved things for the dinner. The birthday dinner was October 18th, a Saturday night. My parents' house on Ridgewood Drive, the same house I grew up in. My mother, Patricia, had made his favorite, pot roast, roasted potatoes, homemade rolls. My grandmother was there. Derek and his girlfriend, Mara. 2 of my father's friends from the bowling league, Ray and Phil. I drove in from Chicago on Friday evening. 5 hours. Got there at 10 p.m., ate the leftovers my mother had saved, and slept in my old bedroom under the same comforter that had been there since I was 16. Saturday morning, my father and Derek left early to look at a job site, a new client in Oakwood who needed a full gutter replacement plus some fascia work. They were gone by 7:30. They got back at noon, laughing about something the homeowner had said, comfortable together in the way that took up all the air in the kitchen when they walked in. "Morning," I said from the table where I was working on my laptop. "Morning," my father said, not breaking stride toward the coffee maker. Derek said, "Hey, Cal," and opened the fridge. I closed my laptop. The afternoon was mostly fine. My grandmother showed me photos on her phone. My mother and I prepped the kitchen together and it was actually good, one of those stretches where everything feels normal in a way that makes you think maybe you've been reading too much into things. Dinner was at 6. My father sat at the head of the table the way he always did, comfortable in that chair the way only a person who has never once doubted their place at a table can be. We ate. There was good wine. My grandmother told a story about a neighbor dispute that made everyone laugh. Derek talked about the new dispatch software and my father listened with his full attention, nodding, asking follow-up questions, leaning forward. I mentioned a client case. A small restaurant group in Pilsen I'd helped restructure their quarterly filings to reduce their estimated payment burden by about $8,000 annually. My father nodded once. Said, picked up his roll. Gifts came after dessert. Derek and Mara gave him a new Milwaukee M18 drill, $180. My father picked it up immediately, turned it over in his hands, said, "Oh man. This is the exact one I wanted." He looked at Derek. "How'd you know?" Derek shrugged and grinned. "I pay attention." My father laughed. Set the drill on the table where he could keep looking at it. My mother gave him a weekend stay at a lodge in Hocking Hills, something they'd been talking about for years. He kissed her on the cheek. My grandmother gave him a framed photo from 1987. Him, young and lean, standing in front of his first truck. Then my gift. He picked up the box. Unwrapped it without rushing, the careful way people unwrap things when they're being polite rather than eager. Opened the case. Looked at the 230 pieces laid out in their foam trays. "Oh, wow," he said. He turned it slightly. Saw the engraving on the inside of the lid. Looked at it for a moment. He didn't say anything about the engraving. "Oh, wow," he said again. He set it on the chair beside him. The Milwaukee drill stayed on the table. My gift went on the chair. I watched that happen. I saw exactly what it meant and I told myself I was being oversensitive. I told myself he was just making room. The food was still warm. My grandmother was still laughing. It was fine. I drove back to Chicago Sunday morning. On Tuesday, Thomas Greer from Callaway Hardware called to confirm the return. I sat at my desk for a long time after that call. Finished my sandwich because it was in front of me and it seemed like the thing to do. Then I pulled up his third quarter payroll tax filing on my screen. It was due that Friday. I had already pulled the numbers. It would have taken me 40 minutes, maybe less. I looked at the file for a while. I thought about the $440. About the 4 tries it took to write 6 words on a brass plate. About 4 years of quarterly filings and amended returns and the $3,200 I'd quietly saved him from a vendor who never even noticed he'd been caught. About the way he'd said, "I don't know what I would have done without you," in the kitchen that August and then never said anything like it again. I thought about the chair beside the table. The one where my gift had been set. What I decided in that moment was not dramatic. It was quiet. It didn't feel like a choice so much as a recognition. I had been doing invisible work for 4 years. I had driven 5 hours for a dinner where my gift was set aside and then returned, without a word, 4 days later. And the man who had done this was not malicious. He was just someone who had decided, without ever saying it out loud, that Derek was the kind of help that mattered and I was the kind that could be assumed. I wasn't angry. Or I was, but it was underneath something colder and quieter and more final. I closed the payroll file. And for the first time in 4 years, I did not file it. That Friday came and went. I did my actual job, the clients who paid me, the quarterly reports, the planning calls. I answered emails. I made coffee. I went for a run along the lakefront on Saturday morning the way I always did when the weather wasn't brutal, and I watched the water and I thought about nothing in particular, which is its own kind of answer. My father didn't call that week about the filing. He never called about the filings, actually. That was sort of the point. He assumed they happened the way he assumed the heat came on when he turned the thermostat up. He didn't think about the mechanism. He just expected the warmth. On November 2nd, he sent me a text. Not about the filing. About Thanksgiving. "Your mom wants to know if you're coming home for the holiday. Derek's bringing Mara. Let us know." I read it twice. The message was fine. Perfectly reasonable. It wasn't even cold, it was just routine, the kind of text you send when you're coordinating headcount for a dinner. But I noticed what it didn't have. No mention of the toolkit. No mention of the phone call from the hardware store. No, "Hey, I meant to tell you, I exchanged that gift, hope that's okay. Just, let us know." I wrote back, "I'll let you know soon." Still figuring out my schedule. I had no schedule conflict. I just needed to sit with it a little longer. There's a version of this story where I spend the quiet period in some kind of anguish. Crying on the phone to Simone, dissecting every dinner, every thumbs up emoji, every oh wow followed by the sound of a gift being set on a chair instead of a table. That's not what happened. What actually happened was something calmer and, in a way, more unsettling. I started to feel clear. I told Simone about the return the second week of November. We were at dinner at a place in Wicker Park, splitting a bottle of wine, and it came out the way these things do, not as a lead story, but as an aside, sandwiched between something else. "He returned it for store credit," I said. Didn't say anything. Simone put her fork down. She looked at me for a long moment. "Callie, how long have you been doing his taxes?" 4 years. For free. Yes. She picked her fork back up. Set it back down again. "And he returned the birthday gift. The engraved one." "Yes." Without a word. "Correct." She looked at me the way someone looks at a math problem that has a simple answer and they can't understand why you haven't found it yet. "Then stop doing his taxes," she said. "I know. I mean it. Stop. Today." I already did, I said. She raised her glass. Good. That was the whole conversation. Which is one of the reasons Simone is my best friend. She didn't tell me I was overreacting. She didn't say, but he's your father, or maybe he just didn't know what to do with it, or have you tried talking to him about how you feel? She just recognized the math and called it what it was. I didn't go home for Thanksgiving. I told my mother I had a client obligation, a partial truth, because I did have a client call that Monday, though it wouldn't have stopped me from traveling if I'd wanted to. My mother said she understood. My father didn't follow up. Derek texted me a photo from the table. Turkey, the good china, my grandmother's hands visible at the edge of the frame reaching for the bread basket. He wrote, "Miss you, Cal, Mom made the good rolls." I sent back a heart emoji and ate pad thai on my couch. December passed. I ignored 2 emails from my father's business address, both routine, the kind of administrative questions he used to route through me out of habit rather than necessity. One about whether a truck purchase could be deducted as a business expense that year. One asking whether he needed to issue a 1099 to a subcontractor he'd paid $4,200 cash for a job in November. Both questions had answers he could have found in 20 minutes with a Google search. I had been answering them for 4 years because it was easier than making him look. I didn't reply to either one. I want to be clear about something. I was not punishing him. I know it looks like I was, but it didn't feel that way from the inside. It felt like I had been running a piece of software on someone else's computer for 4 years, and I had simply stopped opening the program. The computer was still there. He could find someone else to run it. He could learn to run it himself. I just wasn't going to be the one doing it anymore. I filed my own taxes in January. Spent a Saturday morning on it, the way I always did. Made a pot of coffee, put on a playlist, sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and a legal pad. It took 3 hours and felt entirely uncomplicated, which is a strange thing to notice, but I noticed it. How easy it was to do this work when it was mine. Christmas came. I stayed in Chicago. Sent my parents a gift card to a restaurant in Dayton I knew my mother liked. My father texted, "Thanks, Callie." I wrote back, "Of course. Merry Christmas, Dad." And that was winter. The first sign came on a Wednesday in mid-January. My father called my cell at 11 a.m. I was in the middle of a client meeting, so I let it go to voicemail. His message was short, the way his messages always were. "Hey, it's Dad. Give me a call when you get a chance. Got a question about something." A question about something. Not urgent, not specific. I finished my meeting, made a note to call him back, and then got pulled into back-to-back client reviews for the rest of the afternoon. By evening I'd forgotten. I told myself I'd call tomorrow. I didn't call tomorrow. He called again on Friday. Same time, almost to the hour. This time I answered. "Hey, Dad. Callie." "Hey." There was a pause, not long, but enough. "I got something in the mail from the IRS. Letter. Says we missed a payroll deposit. 3rd quarter. There's a penalty notice." I kept my voice even. "Okay. What does the notice say exactly?" I heard him shuffling papers. "Failure to deposit penalty. Says we owe, hang on, it says $1,840 in penalties. Plus there's something about an underpayment, $1,840 in penalties for one missed quarterly filing." Which was exactly the kind of number that would keep growing if the 4th quarter was also unfiled. Which it was. "Did you file the Q4 return?" he asked. "I don't see a confirmation." There was a beat of silence on my end that lasted exactly long enough to mean something. "Callie? I didn't file Q3 or Q4, I said." Another pause. Longer this time. "What do you mean you didn't file them?" "I mean I stopped filing them. In October." He didn't say anything for a moment. I could hear him breathing, Could hear the office sounds in the background, a door, someone saying something in the distance, the ambient noise of his Salem Avenue building. "Why?" he said finally. I didn't answer that. "Not yet. You need to get someone on top of this, Dad. If Q4 hasn't been filed either, the penalties will compound. You'll want to file both as soon as possible and request abatement on the first-time penalty if you haven't used it before. Callie." His voice had shifted. Not angry yet. But tighter. "What happened?" "I stopped doing the filings," I said. "I should have told you I was stopping. That part was my mistake and I own it. But I'm not going to be able to keep doing your books." The silence on his end was different this time. It was the silence of someone recalibrating. "I don't understand," he said. "You will," I said. "Get a CPA on the books before the end of the month. The Q4 payroll filing is overdue as of the 15th, I told him I had to get back to work. Which was true. I got off the phone and sat at my desk for a minute, waiting to feel something larger than I did. I didn't. It was just a conversation. A small, necessary conversation that should have happened in October and hadn't, and now had. I went back to work. What I didn't know, what I found out later from Derek, was what happened on my father's end after that call. He hung up and told Derek to pull the business tax files. Wanted to understand what was behind on what. Derek went to the filing cabinet, found the folders I'd set up 4 years ago, color-coded by quarter, with tabs, with notes in my handwriting explaining the filing logic for any accountant who might take over one day. Derek spent 2 hours with those folders. Then he called a CPA firm in Dayton, Walsh & Greer, the same firm my father had used before I took over, and asked them to come in and do an assessment. The CPA came on a Tuesday. She was there for 4 hours. What she found was that the Q3 payroll filing was late with penalties accruing. That the Q4 filing hadn't been submitted yet. That there were 2 outstanding estimated tax payments my father had meant to make in December that I had also, quietly, automatically, as I always had, stopped processing. And that buried in a 2023 filing was a depreciation schedule for equipment that was set up in a very specific way, a way that had saved the business $11,400 in taxable income that year, that the new CPA said she had never seen structured quite like that and that undoing it incorrectly would trigger an amendment and possibly a review. She told my father, whoever set this up knew what they were doing. My father called me that night at 7:30. "I didn't know how much you were actually doing," he said. "I know," I said. "Walsh said whoever set up the depreciation structure saved us over $11,000 last year." "It was closer to 11,400, I said. "But yes." He was quiet. "Then, why didn't you ever tell me?" I thought about that for a second. It was a genuine question and it deserved a genuine answer. "Because I thought you'd notice," I said. "Eventually." He didn't say anything to that. "Walsh can sort out the penalty filings," I said. "She's good. I'd ask her about first-time abatement on the Q3 notice. You may be able to get that $1,840 reduced or waived if you haven't had a penalty in the last 3 years. Callie, the Q4 filing needs to happen this week. Don't wait." "I hear you. I want to understand what happened. Why you stopped." I had decided, at some point in the previous 3 months, that I wasn't going to have that conversation on the phone. It felt too easy to dismiss on a phone call. Too easy for him to say the right thing in the moment and for me to believe it and for nothing to actually change. I had things I needed to say that deserved more than a phone call. "I'd rather talk about it in person," I said. Another pause. "Okay. When?" "I'm not coming to Dayton right now," I said. "But if you want to come here, I'll make time." The suggestion surprised him. I could tell by the brief silence before he answered. My father had not been to Chicago once in the 3 years I'd lived in my current apartment. He'd come once, early on, for a weekend visit that had felt more like a check-in than a genuine desire to see my life. "You want me to come to Chicago," he said. I'm not asking you to, I said. I'm just saying that's the option I'm offering. He said he'd think about it. We got off the phone. I made dinner and watched something on TV and went to bed at 10:30. 3 days later, the calls started coming faster. Not just from my father. On a Thursday morning, Derek called. He wasn't frantic. Derek is not a frantic person by nature, but he was careful in a way that told me he'd been thinking about what to say before he dialed. Hey, Cal. You got a minute? Sure. So Walsh came in and looked at the books. She flagged a few things. He paused. She said the quarterly structure you built is pretty complex. She can maintain it going forward, but she's having trouble reverse engineering some of the vendor allocation logic you set up in 2022. Said she'd need you to walk her through it or it's going to take her a few weeks to sort out. She can email me, I said. I'll answer what I can. Really? Okay. Thanks, Cal, he sounded relieved. Then, can I ask you something? Go ahead. Did he know you were doing all of this? I didn't answer immediately. I mean, Derek said. Walsh looked at the depreciation schedule and the vendor audits and the amended returns. She said this was probably 40, 50 hours a year minimum. Maybe more. Something like that, I said. Did he know that? I don't think he thought about it, I said. I don't think the number of hours ever occurred to him. Derek was quiet for a moment. Cal, I want to say something and I want you to know I mean it. I didn't know either. I knew you helped with taxes, but I didn't understand what that actually meant. And I should have asked. I believed him. Derek has a lot of our father's easy charm, but he has something my father doesn't, a certain directness about his own shortcomings. He can look at himself and say, I dropped the ball, without a lot of scaffolding around it. I know you didn't know, I said. That's a separate conversation. Okay. But I wanted to say it. We got off the phone. I forwarded Walsh and Greer's email address to Walsh directly with a brief note explaining the vendor allocation structure. Professional, specific, complete. No bitterness. Just the information she needed. My father called again on Sunday evening. And Monday afternoon. And Wednesday morning, the last a voicemail that was longer than his usual, 2.5 minutes, which for my father might as well have been a novel. He said he'd talked to the CPA. Said the penalty situation was getting sorted. Said he'd been thinking a lot about what I'd said, about noticing. Said he'd booked a flight. He landed at O'Hare on a Friday evening. February 7th. I know the exact date because I wrote it down when he texted me his flight number, not as a way of marking time, but because writing things down is how I think. I had the date and the flight number and, next to both, a small note to myself, say what's true. Don't minimize. Don't manage his feelings for him. He texted me when he landed. Just got in. Hotel's on Michigan Avenue. You said tomorrow morning, still good? Still good, I wrote back. 10 o'clock. I'll put coffee on. I sat by the window that night and watched the city for a while. The lights on the lake, the slow pulse of traffic 20 floors below. I thought about everything I needed to say and how I was going to say it. Not a speech. Not an indictment. Just the truth, plainly, the way I'd learned to talk to clients when a number was hard and there was no soft version that was also honest. I went to bed at a reasonable hour. In the morning I made a full pot of coffee, set out 2 mugs, and sat at the kitchen table and waited. He knocked at 10 o'clock exactly. I walked to the door, took one breath, and opened it. My father was standing in the hallway in his good coat, the charcoal wool one he wore to anything that felt like an occasion. He looked older than I'd been holding him in my mind. Not dramatically, just a few more lines around the eyes, a little less certainty in the way he held himself. He was holding a box of pastries from the hotel lobby, the kind that come wrapped in cellophane and taste like effort rather than thought. Hey, kid, he said. I stepped back and let him in. He walked into my apartment the way people walk into a space they've never been in but are trying not to seem impressed by. He looked at the windows first, they face the lake, and in February the light off the water is something, then at the framed degrees on the wall, then at my kitchen, which is small but organized the way I organize everything, deliberately, without waste. "Nice place," he said. "Thank you. Sit down. The coffee's ready." We sat across from each other at the kitchen table. He set the pastry box down between us. Neither of us touched it for a while. "So," he said. "So," I said. He wrapped his hands around his mug. He was a man who filled silences. Normally, that was part of his charm, the easy flow of conversation, the ability to make any room comfortable. But he wasn't filling this one. He was waiting, which told me he understood, at least in part, that he owed me the first move. "You want to know why I stopped," I said. "I want to understand it, yeah." I looked at him. Not angrily. Just directly, the way I'd look at a client whose numbers didn't add up and who I needed to hear the real explanation from. "I got a call from Thomas Greer at Callaway Hardware," I said. October 22nd. He called to confirm that the return on the toolkit had been processed correctly. My father's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You returned it 4 days after your birthday," I said. "For store credit. You didn't mention it. No text, no call. I found out from the hardware store." He nodded slowly. The nod of someone who had known this was coming and had prepared for it and was now finding that preparation was less useful than he'd hoped. "I know," he said. I should have called you." "Why did you return it?" He was quiet for a moment. "The guys in the shop already have the full Craftsman set. I thought the store credit would be more useful. I could put it toward supplies." I waited. "I should have told you," he said again. "Dad." I kept my voice level. "I spent 4 years doing your quarterly filings. Amended returns. Payroll taxes. A vendor audit that saved you over $3,000. A depreciation structure that Walsh told you saved you $11,000 last year alone. I did this on evenings and weekends, around my full-time job, without ever billing you an hour." He looked at the table. "I drove 5 hours to your birthday dinner. I spent 3 lunch breaks figuring out what you actually wanted. I paid $440 for a gift I had engraved because I wanted you to know that I see you." I paused. "And you returned it without a word." He opened his mouth. I held up one hand, not harshly, just, "Let me finish. I'm not telling you the engraving was supposed to change anything. I'm telling you that the return, the silence around it, made something very clear that I think I'd been choosing not to look at. I have been doing real, significant work for your business for 4 years, and in that same time, I can count on one hand the number of times you've mentioned it. But Derek renegotiates a supplier contract and you talk about it at every dinner for a month." My father was very still. "I'm not asking you to love me more than Derek," I said. "That's not what this is. I'm saying you've been taking something from me, my time, my expertise, my effort, and treating it as though it cost nothing and came from nowhere. And I let that happen for a long time because I kept thinking eventually you'd notice. Eventually you'd see it." The room was quiet. The lake light came through the window at that angle it gets in the morning, flat and silver. "I don't know what to say," my father said. "I know," I said. "But I need you to say something that's true. Not something that makes this easier." He looked up at me. And for the first time since I'd opened the door, he looked less like my father performing a version of himself and more like a man sitting in a room where something real was happening. "I took you for granted," he said. 3 words. Simple. No scaffolding around them. "I knew you were capable," he continued, his voice quieter now. "I knew you could handle it. And I think," he stopped. "I think I stopped wondering whether you should have to." I sat with that for a moment. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years, maybe ever, and it landed the way honest things do, not with relief exactly, but with a kind of weight that's different from the weight of things unsaid. Okay, I said. Okay, he said. We sat in the kitchen for another hour. We didn't solve everything. You don't solve 16 years of pattern in an hour over bad hotel pastries. But we said things that were true and we didn't retreat from them, and that was more than I had expected when I opened the door. Before he left, he picked up his coat from the chair, looked around the apartment one more time, at the window, at the degrees, at the life I'd built that he'd never taken the time to see. You've done well, Callie, he said. Not in your own way. Not we're proud of course. Just, you've done well. It was small. I know how small it was. But it was real. And real small things are worth more than performed large ones. I walked him to the door. Walsh can handle the books going forward, I said. She's competent. You're in good hands. He nodded. Paused at the threshold. And us? I thought about that. That's going to take longer than one morning, I said. But I'm willing to find out. He left. I closed the door behind him, stood in the hallway of my own apartment for a moment, and listened to the quiet. Then I went to make a second pot of coffee. Because I had work to do, my own work, the kind that was mine, the kind that had always been mine, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like exactly enough. It's been 3 months since my father sat at my kitchen table. We talk on the phone now, not every week, but regularly enough that it no longer feels like an occasion when his name appears on my screen. The calls are short. He asks about work. I ask about the business. Sometimes he mentions Derek, and I've noticed he mentions me too, in the same breath, without the careful distance he used to put around my name. It's not fixed. I want to be honest about that. For years of invisible labor and 16 years of being the outline of a daughter don't dissolve in one February morning over bad pastries. There are still moments when I catch the old pattern, when he says something that tells me he hasn't quite recalibrated, when I feel myself starting to shrink back into the shape I used to hold for him. When that happens, I don't shrink. I just say the true thing, simply, and let it sit. Walsh and Greer sorted out the penalties. The Q3 abatement went through. The business is fine. I miss the work sometimes. Not the invisibility, I don't miss that at all. But the actual work, the clean logic of a well-structured filing, the satisfaction of a number that comes out right. I still have that. I have it every day. Just for people who know my name when they say thank you. On my mantel, next to my Stanford degree, there's a small brass plate sitting on its own. I kept the engraving. Framed it. For the man who built things right. I look at it sometimes and think, that was always about me, too. If you watched this far, you already know this story hit different. If you want more stories like this one, real ones, the kind people are afraid to tell, they're on your screen right now. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I'll see you there.